प्रथमोऽध्यायः समाधिपादः अथ योगानुशासनम्. And now the self-discipline of yoga. Yogaschittavritti nirodhah.
Yoga is restraining the mind stuff chitta from taking various forms vrittis. A good deal of explanation is necessary here. We have to understand what chitta is and what are these vrittis. I have this eye. Eyes do not see. Take away the brain center which is in the head, the eyes will still be there, the retina complete, and also the picture, and yet the eyes will not see. So the eyes are only a secondary instrument, not the organ of vision. The organ of vision is in the nerve center of the brain. The two eyes will not be sufficient alone. Sometimes a man is asleep with his eyes open. The light is there and the picture is there, but a third thing is necessary. Mind must be joined to the organ. The eye is the external instrument, we need also the brain center and the agency of the mind. Carriages roll down a street, and you do not hear them. Why? Because your mind has not attached itself to the organ of hearing. First there is the instrument. Then there is the organ. And third, the mind attachment to these two. The mind takes the impression farther in and presents it to the determinative faculty, buddhi, which reacts. Along with this reaction, flashes the idea of egoism. Then this mixture of action and reaction is presented to the purusa, the real soul, who perceives an object in this mixture. The organs indriyas, together with the mind manas, the determinative faculty buddhi, and egoism ahamkara, form the group called the antakarana, the internal instrument. They are but various processes in the mind stuff, called chitta. The waves of thought in the chitta are called vritti, the whirlpool is the literal translation. What is thought? Thought is a force, as is gravitation or repulsion. It is absorbed from the infinite storehouse of force in nature. The instrument called chitta takes hold of that force, and, when it passes out at the other end, it is called thought. This force is supplied to us through food, and out of that food the body obtains the power of motion, etc. Others, the finer forces, it throws out in what we call thought. Naturally we see that the mind is not intelligent, yet it appears to be intelligent. Why? Because the intelligent soul is behind it. You are the only sentient being. Mind is only the instrument through which you catch the external world. Take this book. As a book it does not exist. Outside, what exists outside is unknown and unknowable. It is the suggestion that gives a blow to the mind, and the mind gives out the reaction. If a stone is thrown into the water is thrown against it in the form of waves. The real universe is the occasion of the reaction of the mind. A book form, or an elephant form, or a man form, is not outside. All that we know is our mental reaction from the outer suggestion. Matter is the permanent possibility of sensation, said John Stuart Mill. Take an oyster for example. You know how pearls are made. A grain of sand or something gets inside and begins to irritate it, and the oyster throws a sort of enameling around the sand, and this makes the pearl. This whole universe is our own enamel, so to say, and the real universe is the grain of sand. The ordinary man will never understand it, because, when he tries to, he throws out an enamel and sees only his own enamel. Now we understand what is meant by these vrittis. The real man is behind the mind, and the mind is the instrument in his hands, and it is his intelligence that is percolating through it. It is only when you stand behind it that it becomes intelligent. When man gives it up it falls to pieces and is nothing. So you understand what is meant by chitta. It is the mind stuff, and vrittis are the waves and ripples rising in it when external causes impinge on it. These vrittis are our whole universe. The bottom of the lake we cannot see because its surface is covered with ripples. It is only possible when the ripples have subsided and the water is calm for us to catch a glimpse of the bottom. If the water is muddy, the bottom will not be seen. If the water is agitated all the time, the bottom will not be seen. If the water is clear and there are no waves, we shall see the bottom. That bottom of the lake is our own true self. The lake is the chitta and the waves are the vrittis. Again, this mind is in three states. One is darkness, which is called tamas, just as in brutes and idiots. It only acts to injure others. No other idea comes into that state of mind. Then there is the active state of mind, rajas, whose chief motives are power and enjoyment. I will be powerful and rule others. Then, at last, when the waves cease and the water of the lake becomes clear, there is the state called sattva, serenity, calmness. It is not inactive, but rather intensely active. It is the greatest manifestation of power to be calm. It is easy to be active. Let the reins go, and the horses will drag you down. Anyone can do that, but he who can stop the plunging horses is the strong man. Which requires the greater strength, letting go, or restraining. The calm man is not the man who is dull. You must not mistake sattva for dullness or laziness. The calm man is the one who has restraint of these waves. Activity is the manifestation of the lower strength, calmness of the superior strength. This chitta is always trying to get back to its natural pure state, but the organs draw it out. To restrain it, and to check this outward tendency, and to start it on the return journey to that essence of intelligence is the first step in yoga, because only in this way can the chitta get into its proper course. Although this chitta is in every animal, from the lowest to the highest, it is only in the human form that we find intellect, and until the mind stuff can take the form of intellect, it is not possible for it to return through all these steps and liberate the soul. Immediate salvation is impossible for the cow and the dog, although they have mind, because their chitta cannot as yet take that form which we call intellect. Chitta manifests itself in all these different forms, scattering, darkening, weakening, and concentrating. These are the four states in which the mind stuff manifests itself. First, a scattered form is activity. Its tendency is to manifest in the form of pleasure or of pain. Then the dull form is darkness, the only tendency of which is to injure others. The commentator says the first form is natural to the devas, the angels, and the second is the demoniacal form. The ekagra, the concentrated form of the chitta, is what brings us to samadhi.
Tada drashtusvarupe vasthanam.
At that time, the time of concentration, the seer the purasa rests in his own unmodified state. As soon as the waves have stopped and the lake has become quiet, we see the ground below the lake. So with the mind, when it is calm, we see what our own nature is. We do not mix ourselves, but remain our own selves.
Vritti sarupyamitharatra.
At other times other than that of concentration, the seer is identified with the modifications. For instance, I am in a state of sorrow, someone blames me, this is a modification, vritti, and I identify myself with it, and the result is misery.
Vrittayah panchatayah klishta klishtaha.
There are 5 classes of modification, painful and not painful.
Pramana viparyaya vikalpanidra smrutayah.
These are right knowledge, indiscrimination, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory.
Pratyakshanumanagama pramanani.
Direct perception, inference, and competent evidence are proofs. When two of our perceptions do not contradict each other, we call it proof. I hear something, and, if it contradicts something already perceived, I begin to fight it out and do not believe it. There are also 3 kinds of proof. Direct perception, pratyaksham. Whatever we see and feel is proof. If there has been nothing to delude the senses, I see the world. That is sufficient proof that it exists. Secondly, anumana. Inference. You see a sign, and from the sign you come to the thing signified. Thirdly, aptavakyam. The direct perception of the yogi, of those who have seen the truth. We are all of us struggling towards knowledge, but you and I have to struggle hard and come to knowledge through a long tedious process of reasoning. But the yogi, the pure one, has gone beyond all this. Before his mind, the past, the present, and the future are alike one book for him to read. He does not require to go through all this tedious process, and his words are proofs, because he sees knowledge in himself. He is the omniscient one. These, for instance, are the authors of the sacred scriptures. Therefore the scriptures are proof, and, if any such persons are living now, their words will be proof. Other philosophers go into long discussions about this apta, and they say, what is the proof that this is truth? The proof is because they see it. Because whatever I see is proof, and whatever you see is proof, if it does not contradict any past knowledge.
Viparyayo mithyajnana matadrupa pratishtham.
Indiscrimination is false knowledge not established in real nature. The next class of vrittis that arises mistaking the one thing for another, as a piece of mother of pearl is taken for a piece of silver.
शब्दज्ञानानुपाति वस्तुशून्यो विकल्पः.
Verbal delusion follows from words having no corresponding reality. There is another class of vrittis called vikalpa. A word is uttered, and we do not wait to consider its meaning. We jump to a conclusion immediately. It is the sign of weakness of the chitta. Now you can understand the theory of restraint. The weaker the man, the less he has of restraint. Consider yourselves always in that way. When you are going to be angry or miserable, reason it out, how it is that some news that has come to you is throwing your mind into vrittis.
Abhava-pratyayalambana-vrittir-nidra.
Sleep is a vritti which embraces the feeling of voidness. The next class of vrittis is called sleep and dream. When we awake, we know that we have been sleeping, we can only have memory of perception. That which we do not perceive, we never can have any memory of. Every reaction is a wave in the lake. Now, if, during sleep, the mind has no waves, it would have no perceptions, positive or negative, and, therefore, we would not remember them. The very reason of our remembering sleep is that during sleep there was a certain class of waves in the mind. Memory is another class of vrittis, which is called smrti.
Anubhuta vishaya sampramosha smritihi.
Memory is when the vrittis of perceived subjects do not slip away and through impressions come back to consciousness. Memory can be caused by the previous three. For instance, you hear a word. That word is like a stone thrown into the lake of the chitta, it causes a ripple, and that ripple rouses a series of ripples, this is memory. So in sleep, when the peculiar kind of ripple, called sleep, throws the chitta into a ripple of memory, it is called a dream. Dream is another form of the ripple which in the waking state is called memory.
Abhyasa vairagyabhyam tannirodhaha.
Their control is by practice and non-attachment. The mind, to have this non-attachment, must be clear, good and rational. Why should we practice? Because each action is like the pulsations quivering over the surface of the lake. The vibration dies out, and what is left? The samskaras, the impressions. When a large number of these impressions is left on the mind, they coalesce and become a habit. It is said habit is second nature. It is first nature also, and the whole nature of man. Everything that we are is the result of habit. That gives us consolation, because if it is only habit, we can make and unmake it at any time. The samskara is left by these vibrations passing out of our mind, each one of them leaving its result. Our character is the sum total of these marks, and, according as some particular wave prevails, one takes that tone. If good prevail, one becomes good, if wickedness, one wicked, if joyfulness, one becomes happy. The only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. All the bad habits that have left their impressions are to be controlled by good habits. Go on doing good, thinking holy thoughts continuously, that is the only way to suppress base impressions. Never say any man is hopeless, because he only represents a character, a bundle of habits, and these can be checked by new and better ones. Character is repeated habits, and repeated habits alone can reform character.
Tatra sthitau yatnobhyasaha.
Continuous struggle to keep them the vrittis perfectly restrained is practice. What is this practice? The attempt to restrain the mind in the chitta form, to prevent its going out into waves.
Satu dirghakala nairantarya satkara sevito dridha bhumihi.
Its ground becomes firm by long, constant efforts with great love for the end to be attained. Restraint does not come in one day, but by long continued practice.
Drishtanushravika vishaya vitrishnasya vashikara sanya vairagyam.
That effort, which comes to those who have given up their thirst after objects, either seen or heard, and which wills to control the objects, is non-attachment. Two motives of our actions are 1. What we see ourselves, 2. The experience of others. These two forces are throwing the mind, the lake, into various waves. Renunciation is the power of battling against these and holding the mind in check. Renunciation of these two motives is what we want. I am passing through a street and a man comes and takes my watch. That is my own experience. I see it myself and it immediately throws my chitta into a wave, taking the form of anger. Allow that not to come. If you cannot prevent that, you are nothing. If you can, you have viragyam. Similarly, the experience of the worldly minded teaches us that sense enjoyments are the highest ideal. These are tremendous temptations. To deny them and not allow the mind to come into a wave form with regard to them is renunciation. To control the twofold motive powers arising from my own experience and from the experience of others, and thus prevent the chitta from being governed by them, is viragyam. These should be controlled by me and not I by them. This sort of mental strength is called renunciation. This viragyam is the only way to freedom.
Tatparam purushakhyater gunavaitrishnyam.
That extreme, non-attachment, giving up even the qualities, shows the real nature of the Purusa. It is the highest manifestation of power when it takes away even our attraction towards the qualities. We have first to understand what the Purusa, the self, is, and what are the qualities. According to yoga philosophy, the whole of nature consists of three qualities. One is called tamas, another rajas, and the third sattva. These three qualities manifest themselves in the physical world as attraction, repulsion, and control. Everything that is in nature, all these manifestations, are combinations and recombinations of these three forces. This nature has been divided into various categories by the Sankhya's. The self of man is beyond all these, beyond nature, is effulgent by its very nature. It is pure and perfect. Whatever of intelligence we see in nature is but the reflection from this self upon nature. Nature itself is insentient. You must remember that the word nature also includes the mind. Mind is in nature, thought is in nature, from thought down to the grossest form of matter, everything is in nature, the manifestation of nature. This nature has covered the self of man, and when nature takes away the covering, the self becomes unveiled and appears in its own glory. This non-attachment, as it is described in aphorism 15 as being control of nature, is the greatest help towards manifesting the self. The next aphorism defines samadhi, perfect concentration, which is the goal of the yogi.
Vitarka vicharānandāsmitarupanugamat samprajñātah.
The concentration called right knowledge is that which is followed by reasoning, discrimination, bliss, unqualified ego. This samadhi is divided into two varieties. One is called the samprajñāta and the other, the asamprajñāta. The samprajñāta is of four varieties. In this samadhi come all the powers of controlling nature. The first variety is called the savatarka, when the mind meditates upon an object again and again by isolating it from other objects. There are two sorts of objects for meditation, the categories of nature and the purusa. Again, the categories are of two varieties. The 24 categories are insentient and the one sentient is the purusa. When the mind thinks of the elements of nature by thinking of their beginning and their end, this is one sort of savatarka. The words require explanation. This part of yoga is based entirely on Sankhya philosophy, about which I have already told you. As you will remember, egoism and will and mind have a common basis, and that common basis is called the chitta, the mind stuff, out of which they are all manufactured. This mind stuff takes in the forces of nature and projects them as thought. There must be something, again, where both force and matter are one. This is called avyaktam, the unmanifested state of nature before creation, and to which, after the end of a cycle, the whole of nature returns to again come out after another period. Beyond that is the purusa, the essence of intelligence. There is no liberation in getting powers. It is a worldly search after enjoyment in this life. All search for enjoyment is vain. This is the old lesson, which man finds it so hard to learn. When he does learn it, he gets out of the universe and becomes free. The possession of what are called occult powers is only intensifying the world and, in the end, intensifying suffering. Though, as a scientist, Patanjali is bound to point out the possibilities of this science, he never misses an opportunity to warn us against these powers. Knowledge is power, and as soon as we begin to know a thing we get power over it, so also, when the mind begins to meditate on the different elements it gains power over them. That sort of meditation where the external gross elements are the objects is called savatarka. Tarka means question, savatarka with question. Questioning the elements, as it were, that they may give up their truths and their powers to the man who meditates upon them. Again, in the very same meditation, when one struggles to take the elements out of time and space and think of them as they are, it is called nirvitarka, without question. When the meditation goes a step higher and takes the 10 matras as its object and thinks of them as in time and space, it is called savachara, with discrimination. And when the same meditation gets beyond time and space and thinks of the fine elements as they are, it is called nirvichara, without discrimination. The next step is when the elements are given up, either as gross or as fine, and the object of meditation is the interior organ, the thinking organ, and when the thinking organ is thought of as bereft of the qualities of activity and of dullness, it is then called sanandam, the blissful samadhi. In that samadhi, when we are thinking of the mind as the object of meditation, before we have reached the state which takes us beyond the mind, even when it has become very ripe and concentrated, when all ideas of the gross materials or fine materials have been given up and the only object is the mind as it is, when the sattva state only of the ego remains, but differentiated from all other objects, this is called asmita samadhi, and the man who has attained to this has attained to what is called, in the Vedas, bereft of body. He can think of himself as without his gross body, but he will have to think of himself as with a fine body. Those that in this state get merged in nature without attaining the goal are called prakritalayas, but those who do not even stop at any enjoyments reach the goal, which is freedom.
Virama pratyayabhyasa purvaha samskarashe shunyaha.
There is another samadhi, which is attained by the constant practice of cessation of all mental activity, in which the chitta retains only the unmanifested impressions. This is the perfect superconscious asamprajnata samadhi, the state which gives us freedom. The first state does not give us freedom, does not liberate the soul. A man may attain to all powers and yet fall again. There is no safeguard until the soul goes beyond nature and beyond conscious concentration. It is very difficult to attain, although its method seems very easy. Its method is to hold the mind as the object and whenever through comes, to strike it down, allowing no thought to come into the mind, thus making it an entire vacuum. When we can really do this, in that moment we shall attain liberation. When persons, without training and preparation, try to make their minds vacant, they are likely to succeed only in covering themselves with tamas, material of ignorance, which makes the mind dull and stupid and leads them to think that they are making a vacuum of the mind. To be able to really do that is a manifestation of the greatest strength, of the highest control. When this state, asamprajnata, superconsciousness, is reached, the samadhi becomes seedless. What is meant by that? In that sort of concentration, when there is consciousness, where the mind has succeeded only in quelling the waves in the chitta and holding them down, they are still there in the form of tendencies, and these tendencies or seeds will become waves again when the time comes. But when you have destroyed all these tendencies, almost destroyed the mind, then it has become seedless. There are no more seeds in the mind out of which to manufacture again and again this plant of life, this ceaseless round of birth and death. You may ask, what state would that be in which we should have no knowledge? What we call knowledge is a lower state than the one beyond knowledge. You must always bear in mind that the extremes look very much the same.
Bhava pratyayo videha prakritilayana.
This samadhi, when not followed by extreme non-attachment, becomes the cause of the re-manifestation of the gods and of those that become merged in nature. The gods in the Indian systems represent certain high offices which are being filled successively by various souls. But none of them is perfect.
Shraddha virya smriti samadhi prajna purvaka itaresham.
To others, this samadhi comes through faith, energy, memory, concentration, and discrimination of the real. These are they who do not want the position of gods or even that of rulers of cycles. They attain to liberation.
Tivra samveganamasannaha.
Success is speeded for the extremely energetic.
Mrudu madhyadhimatratvat tatopi visheshaha.
They again differ according as the means are mild, medium, or supreme.
Ishvara pranidhanadva.
Or by devotion to Isvara.
Klesha karma vipakashayairaparam rishtaha purusha vishesha ishvaraha.
Isvara, the supreme ruler, is a special purusa, untouched by misery, the results of actions, or desires. We must again remember that this Patanjali yoga philosophy is based upon that of the Sankhyas, only that in the latter, there is no place for God, while, with the yogis, God has a place. The yogis, however, avoid many ideas about God, such as creating. God as the creator of the universe is not meant by the Isvara of the yogis, although, according to the Vedas, Isvara is the creator of the universe. Seeing that the universe is harmonious, it must be the manifestation of one will. The yogis and Sankhyas both avoid the question of creation. The yogis want to establish a God, but carefully avoid this question. They do not raise it at all. Yet you will find that they arrive at God in a peculiar fashion of their own. They say,
Tatra niratishayam sarvagnya bijam.
in him becomes infinite, that all-knowingness which in others is only a germ. The mind must always travel between two extremes. You can think of limited space, but the very idea of that gives you also unlimited space. Close your eyes and think of a little space, and, at the same time that you perceive the little circle, you have a circle rounded of unlimited dimensions. It is the same with time. Try to think of a second, you will have, with the same act of perception, to think of time, which is unlimited. So with knowledge. Knowledge is only a germ in man, but you will have to think of infinite knowledge around it, so that the very nature of your constitution shows us that there is unlimited knowledge, and the yogis call that unlimited knowledge God.
Sapurveshamapi guruh kalena navachhedat.
He is the teacher of even the ancient teachers, being not limited by time. It is true that all knowledge is within ourselves, but this has to be called forth by another knowledge. Although the capacity to know is inside us, it must be called out, and that calling out of knowledge can only be got, a yogi maintains, through another knowledge. Dead, insentient matter never calls out knowledge.
Tasya vachakah pranavah.
His manifesting word is Every idea that you have in the mind has a counterpart in a word. The word and the thought are inseparable. The external part of the thought is what we call word, and the internal part is what we call thought. No man can, by analysis, separate thought from word. The idea that language was created by men, certain men sitting together and deciding on words, has been proved to be wrong. So long as things have existed, there have been words and language.
Tajjapastadartha bhavanam.
The repetition of this and meditating on its meaning is the way. Why should there be repetition? We have not forgotten that theory of samskaras, that the sum total of impressions lives in the mind. Impressions live in the mind, the sum total of impressions, and they become more and more latent, but remain there, and as soon as they get the right stimulus, they come out. Molecular vibration will never cease. When this universe is destroyed, all the massive vibrations disappear. The sun, moon, stars, and earth will melt down, but the vibrations must remain in the atoms. Each atom will perform the same function as the big worlds do. So, the vibrations of this chitta will subside, but will go on like molecular vibrations, and when they get the impulse will come out again. We can now understand what is meant by repetition. It is the greatest stimulus that can be given to the spiritual samskaras.
Tatah pratyak chetanadhigamopyantaraya bhavascha.
From that is gained the knowledge of introspection and the destruction of obstacles. The first manifestation of this repetition and thinking of will be that the introspective power will be manifested more and more, and all the mental and physical obstacles will begin to vanish. What are the obstacles to the yogi?
Vyadhisthana samshaya pramadalasya virati bhranti darshana labdha bhumikatvana avasthitattvani chitta vikshepastentarayaha.
Disease, mental laziness, doubt, calmness, cessation, false perception, non-attaining concentration, and falling away from the state when obtained are the obstructing distractions. Disease. This body is the boat which will carry us to the other shore of the ocean of life. It must be taken care of. Unhealthy persons cannot be yogis. Mental laziness makes us lose all lively interest in the subject, without which there will neither be the will nor the energy to practice. Doubts will arise in the mind about the truth of the science, however strong one's intellectual conviction may be, until certain peculiar psychic experiences come, as hearing or seeing at a distance, etc. These glimpses strengthen the mind and make the student persevere. Falling away when attained. Some says or weeks, when you are practicing, the mind will be calm and easily concentrated, and you will find yourself progressing fast. All of a sudden the progress will stop one day, and you will find yourself, as it were, stranded. Persevere. All progress proceeds by rise and fall.
दुःखदौर्मनस्याङ्गमे जयत्वश्वासप्रश्वासा विक्षेपसह भुवः.
Grief, mental distress, tremor of the body, and irregular breathing accompany non-retention of concentration. Concentration will bring perfect repose to mind and body every time it is practiced. When the practice has been misdirected or not enough controlled, these disturbances come. Repetition of Om and self-surrender to the Lord will strengthen the mind and bring fresh energy. The nervous shakings will come to almost everyone. Do not mind them at all, but keep on practicing. Practice will cure them and make the seat firm.
तत्प्रतिषेधार्थमेकतत्वाभ्यासः.
To remedy this, practice of one subject should be made. Making the mind take the form of one object for some time will destroy these obstacles. This is general advice. In the following aphorisms, it will be expanded and particularized. As one practice cannot suit everyone, various methods will be advanced, and everyone by actual experience will find out that which helps him most.
मैत्री करुणा मुदितोपेक्षाणां सुखदुःखपुण्यापुण्यविषयाणां भावनातश्चित्तप्रसादनम्.
Friendship, mercy, gladness, indifference, being thought of in regard to subjects, happy, unhappy, good, and evil respectively, pacify the chitta. We must have these four sorts of ideas. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. When people are happy, we ought to be happy, and to the wicked we must be indifferent. So, with all subjects that come before us. If the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. If the subject of thought is one that is miserable, we must be merciful towards the subject. If it is good, we must be glad. If it is evil, we must be indifferent. These attitudes of the mind towards the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way.
प्रच्छर्दनविधारणाभ्यां वा प्राणस्य.
By throwing out and restraining the breath. The word used in prana. Prana is not exactly breath. It is the name for the energy that is in the universe. Whatever you see in the universe, whatever moves, or works, or has life, is a manifestation of this prana. The sum total of the energy displayed in the universe is called prana. This prana, before a cycle begins, remains in an almost motionless state, and when the cycle begins, this prana begins to manifest itself. It is this prana that is manifested as motion, as the nervous motion in human beings or animals, and the same prana is manifesting as thought, and so on. The whole universe is a combination of prana and akasa. So is the human body. Out of akasa you get the different materials that you feel and see, and out of prana all the various forces.
विषयवती वा प्रवृत्तिरुत्पन्ना मनसस्थितिनिबन्धिनी.
Those forms of concentration that bring extraordinary sense perceptions cause perseverance of the mind. This naturally comes with dharana, concentration. The yogis say, if the mind becomes concentrated on the tip of the nose, one begins to smell, after a few days, wonderful perfumes. If it becomes concentrated at the root of the tongue, one begins to hear sounds. If on the tip of the tongue, one begins to taste wonderful flavors. If on the middle of the tongue, one feels as if he were coming in contact with something. If one concentrates his mind on the palate, he begins to see peculiar things. If a man whose mind is disturbed wants to take up some of these practices of yoga, yet doubts the truth of them, he will have his doubts set at rest when, after a little practice, these things come to him, and he will persevere.
Vishokava jyotishmati.
Or by the meditation on the effulgent one which is beyond all sorrow. This is another sort of concentration. Think of the lotus of the heart, with petals downwards and ruining through it the sukumna. Take in the breath and, while throwing the breath out, imagine that the lotus is turned with the petals upwards and inside that lotus is an effulgent light. Meditate on that.
वीतराग विषयं वा चित्तम्
Or by meditation on the heart that has given up all attachment to sense objects. Take some holy person, some great person whom you revere, some saint whom you know to be perfectly non-attached, and think of his heart. That heart has become non-attached, and meditate on that heart. It will calm the mind. If you cannot do that, there is the next way.
स्वप्न निद्रा ज्ञानालम्बनं वा
Or by meditating on the knowledge that comes in sleep. Sometimes a man dreams that he has seen angels coming to him and talking to him, that he is in an ecstatic condition, that he has heard music floating through the air. He is in a blissful condition in that dream, and when he awakes, it makes a deep impression on him. Think of that dream as real and meditate upon it. If you cannot do that, meditate on any holy thing that pleases you.
यथाभिमतध्यानात् वा
Or by meditation on anything that appeals to one as good. This does not mean any wicked subject, but anything good that you like, any place that you like best, any scenery that you like best, any idea that you like best, anything that will concentrate the mind.
परमाणु परममहत्वान्तोऽस्य वशीकारः
The yogi's mind, thus meditating, becomes unobstructed from the atomic to the infinite. The mind, by this practice, easily contemplates the most minute thing, as well as the biggest thing. Thus the mind waves become fainter.
क्षीणवृत्तेरभिजातस्येव मणिर्ग्रहीतृग्रहणग्राह्येषु तत्स्थतदञ्जनता समापत्तिः.
The yogi, whose vrittis have thus become powerless controlled, obtains in the receiver, receiving, and receive the self, the mind and external objects, concentratedness and sameness, like the crystal before different colored objects. What results from this constant meditation? We must remember how in a previous aphorism Patanjali went into the various states of meditation, and how the first will be the gross, and the second the fine objects, and from them, the advances to still finer objects of meditation, and how, in all these meditations, which are only of the first degree, not very high ones, we get as a result that we can meditate as easily on the fine as on the grosser objects.
तत्र शब्दार्थज्ञानविकल्पैः संकीर्णा सवितर्का समापत्तिः.
Sound, meaning, and resulting knowledge being mixed up is called samadhi with reasoning. Sound here means vibration. Meaning, the nerve currents which conduct it. And knowledge, reaction. All the various meditations we have had so far, Patanjali calls Savitarka meditations with reasoning. Later on, he will give us higher and higher, dhyanas. In these, that are called with reasoning, we keep the duality of subject and object, which results from the mixture of word, meaning, and knowledge. There is first the external vibration, the word. This, carried inward by the sense currents, is the meaning. After that there comes a reactionary wave in the chitta, which is knowledge, but the mixture of these three make up what we call knowledge. In all the meditations up to this, we get this mixture as object of meditation. The next samadhi is higher.
स्मृति परिशुद्धौ स्वरूपशून्ये वार्थमात्र निर्भासा निर्वितर्का.
The samadhi called without reasoning comes when the memory is purified or devoid of qualities, expressing only the meaning of the meditated object. It is by practice of meditation of these three that we come to the state where these three do not mix. We can get rid of them. We will first try to understand what these three are. Here is the chitta. You will always remember the simile of the lake, the mind stuff, and the vibration, the word, the sound, like a pulsation coming over it. You have that calm lake in you, and I pronounce a word, cow. As soon as it enters through your ears, there is a wave produced in your chitta along with it. So, that wave represents the idea of the cow, the form, or the meaning as we call it.
एतयैव सविचारा निर्विचारा च सूक्ष्मविषया व्याख्याता.
By this process the concentrations, with discrimination and without discrimination, whose objects are finer, are also explained. A process similar to the preceding is applied again, only the objects to be taken up in the former meditations are gross, in this they are fine.
सूक्ष्मविषयत्वं चालिङ्गपर्यवसानम्.
The finer objects end with the pradhana. The gross objects are only the elements and everything manufactured out of them. The fine objects begin with the tanmatras, or fine particles. The organs, the mind egoism, the mind stuff, the cause of all manifestation, the equilibrium state of sattva, rajas, and tamas materials called pradhana chief, prakriti nature, or avyakta unmanifest, are all included within the category of fine objects. The purus of the soul alone is accepted from this definition.
ता एव सबीजः समाधिः.
These concentrations are with seed. These do not destroy the seeds of past actions, thus cannot give liberation, but what they bring to the yogi is stated in the following aphorisms.
निर्विचारवैशारद्येऽध्यात्मप्रसादः.
The concentration without reasoning, being purified, the chitta becomes firmly fixed.
ऋतम्भरा तत्र प्रज्ञा.
The knowledge in that is called filled with truth. The next aphorism will explain this.
श्रुतानुमानप्रज्ञाभ्यामन्यविषया विशेषार्थत्वात्.
The knowledge that is gained from testimony and inference is about common objects. That from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. The idea is that we have to get our knowledge of ordinary objects by direct perception and by inference therefrom, and from testimony of people who are competent. By people who are competent, the yogis always mean the rishis, or the seers of the thoughts recorded in the scriptures, the Vedas. According to them, the only proof of the scriptures is that they were the testimony of competent persons, yet they say the scriptures cannot take us to realization. We can read all the Vedas and yet will not realize anything, but when we practice their teachings, then we attain to that state which realizes what the scriptures say, which penetrates where reason cannot go, and where the testimony of others cannot avail.
तज्ज संस्कारोऽन्यसंस्कारप्रतिबन्धी.
The resulting impression from this samadhi obstructs all other impressions. We have seen in the foregoing aphorism that the only way of attaining to that super consciousness is by concentration, and we have also seen that what hinder the mind from concentration are the past samskaras, impressions. All of you have observed that when you are trying to concentrate your mind, your thoughts wander. When you are trying to think of God, that is the very time which all these samskaras take to appear. At other times they are not so active, but when you want them not to be, they are sure to be there, trying their best to crowd inside your mind. Why should that be so? Why should they be much more potent at the time of concentration? It is because you are repressing them, and they react with all their force. At other times they do not react. How countless these old past impressions must be, all lodged somewhere in the chitta, ready, waiting like tigers to jump up.
तस्यापि निरोधे सर्वनिरोधान् निर्बीजः समाधिः.
By the restraint of even this impression, which obstructs all other impressions, all being restrained, comes the seedless samadhi. You remember that our goal is to perceive the soul itself. We cannot perceive the soul because it has got mingled up with nature, with the mind, with the body. The most ignorant man thinks his body is the soul. The more learned man thinks his mind is the soul, but both of these are mistaken. What makes the soul get mingled up with all this? These different waves in the chitta rise and cover the soul, and we only are a little reflection of the soul through these waves. So, if the wave be one of anger, we see the soul is angry. I am angry, we say. If the wave is a wave of love, we see ourselves reflected in that wave and say we are loving. If that wave is one of weakness and the soul is reflected in it, we think we are weak. These various ideas come from these impressions, these samskaras covering the soul.
द्वितीयोऽध्यायः साधनपादः तपस्वाध्यायेश्वरप्रणिधानानि क्रियायोगः.
Mortification, study, and surrendering fruits of work to God are called Kriya Yoga. Those samadhis with which we ended our last chapter are very difficult to attain. So, we must take them up slowly. The first step, the preliminary step, is called Kriya Yoga. Literally this means work, working towards yoga. The organs are the horses, the mind is the reins, the intellect is the charioteer, the soul is the rider, and this body is the chariot. The master of the household, the king, the self of man, is sitting in this chariot. If the horses are very strong and do not obey the reins, if the charioteer, the intellect, does not know how to control the horses, then this chariot will come to grief. But if the organs, the horses, are well controlled, and if the reins, the mind, are well held in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, the chariot reaches the goal. What is meant, therefore, by mortification? Holding the reins firmly, while guiding this body and mind, not letting the body do anything it likes, but keeping them both in proper control. Study. What is meant by study in this case? Not study of novels, or fiction, or story books, but study of those books which teach the liberation of the soul.
Samadhi bhavanarthah kleshatanukaraṇarthascha.
They are four: the practice of samadhi and minimizing the pain-bearing obstructions. Most of us make our minds like spoiled children, allowing them to do whatever they want. Therefore, it is necessary that there should be constant practice of the previous mortifications in order to gain control of the mind and bring it into subjection. The obstructions to yoga arise from lack of this control and cause us pain. They can only be removed by denying the mind and holding it in check through these various means.
Avidya smita raga dveshabhinivesha kleshaha.
The pain-bearing obstructions are ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. These are the five pains, the five-fold tie that binds us down. Of course, ignorance is the mother of all the rest. She is the only cause of all our misery. What else can make us miserable? The nature of the soul is eternal bliss. What can make it sorrowful except ignorance, hallucination, delusion? All this pain of the soul is simply delusion.
Avidya kshetramuttaresham prasuptatanu vichhinnodaranam.
Ignorance is the productive field of all them that follow, whether they are dormant, attenuated, overpowered, or expanded. Impressions are the cause of these, and these impressions exist in different degrees. There are the dormant. You often hear the expression innocent as a baby, yet, in the baby, may be the state of a demon, or of a god which will come out, by and by. In the yogi, these impressions, the samskaras left by past actions, are attenuated. That is, in a very fine state, and he can control them and not allow them to become manifest. Overpowered means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger, but they will come out when that repressing cause is removed. The last state is the expanded, when the samskaras, having helpful surroundings, have attained to great activity, either as good or evil.
Anitya shuchi dukkhanatmasu nitya shuchi sukhatmakhyatiravidya.
Ignorance is taking that which is non-eternal, impure, painful, and non-self for the eternal, pure, happy, Atman self. All these various sorts of impression have one source: ignorance. We have first to learn what ignorance is. All of us think that I am the body and not the self, the pure, the effulgent, the ever blissful, and that is ignorance. We think of man and see man as body. This is the great delusion.
Drigdarshana shaktyorekatmatevasmita.
Egoism is the identification of the seer with the instrument of seeing. The seer is really the self, the pure one, the ever holy, the infinite, the immortal. That is the self of man. And what are the instruments? The chitta, or mind stuff, the buddhi, determinative faculty, the manas, or mind, and the indriyani, or sense organs. These are the instruments for him to see the external world, and the identification of the self with the instruments is what is called the ignorance of egoism. We say, I am the mind, I am thought, I am angry, or I am happy. How can we be angry, and how can we hate? We should identify ourselves with the self that cannot change. If it is unchangeable, how can it be one moment happy and one moment unhappy? It is formless, infinite, omnipresent. What can change it? Beyond all law. What can affect it? Nothing in the universe can produce an effect on it, yet, through ignorance, we identify ourselves with the mind stuff and think we feel pleasure or pain.
Sukhanushayi ragaha.
Attachment is that which dwells on pleasure. We find pleasure in certain things, and the mind, like a current, flows towards them, and that, following the pleasure center, as it were, is attachment. We are never attached to anyone in whom we do not find pleasure. We find pleasure in very queer things sometimes, but the definition is just the same. Wherever we find pleasure, there we are attached.
दुःखानुशयी द्वेषः.
Aversion is that which dwells on pain. That which gives us pain, we immediately seek to get away from.
स्वरसवाही विदुषोऽपि तथा रूढोऽभिनिवेशः.
Flowing through its own nature, and established even in the learned, is the clinging to life. This clinging to life, you see manifested in every animal, and upon it many attempts have been made to build the theory of a future life, because men like their lives so much that they desire a future life also. Of course, it goes without saying that this argument is without much value, but the most curious part of it is that, in Western countries, the idea that this clinging to life indicates a possibility of a future life applies only to men, but does not include animals. In India, this clinging to life has been one of the arguments to prove past experience and existence. For instance, if it be true that all our knowledge has come from experience, then it is sure that that which we never experienced we cannot imagine or understand. As soon as chickens are hatched, they begin to pick up food. Many times it has been seen where ducks have been hatched by hens that, as soon as they come out of the eggs, they flew to water, and the mother thought they would be drowned. If experience be the only source of knowledge, where did these chickens learn to pick up food, or the ducklings, that the water was their natural element? If you say it is instinct, it means nothing. It is simply giving it a word, but is no explanation. What is this instinct? We have many instincts in ourselves. For instance, most of you ladies play the piano, and remember, when you first learned, how carefully you had to put your fingers on the black and the white keys, one after the other, but now, after long years of practice, you can talk with your friends, and your hand goes on just the same.
ते प्रतिप्रसवहेया सूक्ष्माः.
They, to be rejected by opposite modifications, are fine. How are these fine samskaras to be controlled? We have to begin with the big waves and come down and down. For instance, when a big wave of anger has come into the mind, how are we to control that? Just by raising a big opposing wave. Think of love. Sometimes a mother is very angry with her husband, and while in that state the baby comes in, and she kisses the baby. The old wave dies out, and a new wave arises, love for the child. That suppresses the other one. Love is opposite to anger. So we find that, by raising the opposite waves we can conquer those which we want to reject. Then, if we can raise in our fine nature those fine opposing waves, they will check the fine workings of anger beneath the conscious surface. We have seen now that all these instinctive actions first began as conscious actions and became finer and finer. So, if good waves in the conscious chitta be constantly raised, they will go down, become subtle, and oppose the samskara forms of evil thoughts.
ध्यानहेयास्तद्वृत्तयः.
By meditation, their modifications are to be rejected. Meditation is one of the great means of controlling the rising of these big waves. By meditation, you can make the mind subdue these waves, and, if you go on practicing meditation for days, and months, and years, until it has become a habit, until it will come in spite of yourself, anger and hatred will be controlled and checked.
क्लेशमूलः कर्माशयो दृष्टादृष्टजन्मवेदनीयः.
The receptacle of works has its root in these pain-bearing obstructions, and their experience in this visible life, or in the unseen life. By the receptacle of works is meant the sum total of these samskaras. Whatever work we do, the mind is thrown into a wave, and, after the work is finished, we think the wave is gone. No. It has only become fine, but it is still there. When we try to remember the thing, it comes up again and becomes a wave. So it was there. If it had not been there, there would not have been memory. So, every action, every thought, good or bad, just goes down and becomes fine and is there stored up. They are called pain-bearing obstructions, both happy and unhappy thoughts, because, according to the yogis, both, in the long run, bring pain. All happiness which comes from the senses will, eventually, bring pain. All enjoyment will make us thirst for more, and that brings pain as its result. There is no limit to man's desires. He goes on desiring, and when he comes to a point where desire cannot be fulfilled, the result is pain. Therefore, the yogis regard the sum total of the impressions, good or evil, as pain-bearing obstructions. They obstruct the way to freedom of the soul.
Sati mule tadvipako jatyayurbhogaah.
The root being there, the fruition comes in the form of species, life, and expression of pleasure and pain. The roots, the causes, the samskaras being there, they again manifest and form the effects. The cause dying down becomes the effect, and the effect becomes more subtle and becomes the cause of the next effect. The tree bears a seed and becomes the cause of the next tree, and so on. All our works now are the effects of past samskaras. Again, these samskaras become the cause of future actions, and thus we go on. So this aphorism says that, the cause being there, the fruit must come in the form of species. One will be a man, another an angel, another an animal, another a demon. Then, there are different effects in life. One man lives 50 years, another 100, and another dies in 2 years and never attains maturity. All these differences in life are regulated by these past actions. One man is born, as it were, for pleasure. If he buries himself in a forest, pleasure will follow him there. Another man, wherever he goes, pain follows him, everything becomes painful. It is all the result of their own past. According to the philosophy of the yogis, all virtuous actions bring pleasure, and all vicious actions bring pain. Any man who does wicked deeds is sure to reap the fruit of them in the form of pain.
Te hlada paritapa phalaha punya punya hetutvat.
They bear fruit as pleasure or pain, caused by virtue or vice.
Parinama tapa sanskara dukkhair guna vritti virodhacha dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha.
To the discriminating, all is, as it were, painful on account of everything bringing pain, either in the consequences, or in apprehension, or in attitude caused by impressions, also on account of the counteraction of qualities. The yogis say that, the man who has discriminating powers, the man of good sense, sees through all these various things, which are called pleasure and pain, and knows that they are always equally distributed, and that one follows the other, and melts into the other. He sees that men are following an ignis fatuus all their lives, and never succeed in fulfilling their desires. There was never a love in this world which did not know decay. The great King Yudhisthira once said that, the most wonderful thing in life is that, every moment we see people dying around us, and yet, we think we shall never die. Surrounded by fools on every side, we think we are the only exceptions, the only learned men. Surrounded by all sorts of experiences of fickleness, we think our love is the only lasting love. How can that be? Even love is selfish, and the yogi says that, in the end, we shall find that even the love of husbands and wives, and children and friends, slowly decays. Decadence seizes everything in this life. It is only when everything, even love, fails, that, with a flash, man finds out how vain, how dreamlike is this world.
Heyam dukkhamanagatam.
The misery which is not yet come is to be avoided. Some karma we have worked out already, some we are working out now in the present, and some is waiting to bear fruit in the future. That which we have worked out already is past and gone. That which we are experiencing now, we will have to work out, and it is only that which is waiting to bear fruit in the future that we can conquer and control, so all our forces should be directed towards the control of that karma, which has not yet borne fruit. That is meant in the previous aphorism, when Patanjali says that these various samskaras are to be controlled by counteracting waves.
Drashtra drishyayo sanyogo heya hetuhu.
The cause of that which is to be avoided is the junction of the seer and the seen. Who is the seer? The self of man, the purusa. What is the seen? The whole of nature, beginning with the mind, down to gross matter. All this pleasure and pain arises from the junction between this purusa and the mind. The purusa, you must remember, according to this philosophy, is pure. It is when it is joined to nature, and by reflection, that it appears to feel either pleasure or pain.
Prakasha kriya sthiti-sheelam bhutendriyatmakam bhogapavargartham drishyam.
The experienced is composed of elements and organs, is of the nature of illumination, action, and intertia, and is, for the purpose of experience and release of the experiencer. The experienced, that is nature, is composed of elements and organs. The elements gross and fine which compose the whole of nature, and the organs of the senses, mind, etc., and is of the nature of illumination, action, and intertia. These are what in Sanskrit are called sattva, illumination, rajas, action, and tamas, darkness. Each is for the purpose of experience and relays. What is the purpose of the whole of nature? That the Purusa may gain experience. The Purusa has, as it were, forgotten its mighty, godly nature. There is a story that the king of the gods, Indra, once became a pig, swallowing in mire. He had a she-pig and a lot of baby pigs and was very happy. Then some other angels saw his plight and came to him and told him, "You are the king of the gods, you have all the gods' command."
Vishesha Vishesha Lingamatra Lingani Gunaparvani.
The states of the qualities are the defined, the undefined, the indicated only, and the signless. The system of yoga is built entirely on the philosophy of the Sankhyas, as I told you in some of the previous lectures, and here again I will remind you of the cosmology of the Sankhya philosophy. According to the Sankhyas, nature is both the material and efficient cause of this universe. In this nature there are three sorts of materials, the sattva, the rajas, and the tamas. The tamas material is all that is dark, all that is ignorant and heavy. And the rajas is activity. The sattvas is calmness, light. When nature is in the state before creation, it is called by them avyaktam, undefined, or indiscrete, that is, in which there is no distinction of form or name, a state in which these three materials are held in perfect balance. Then the balance is disturbed, these different materials begin to mingle in various fashions, and the result is this universe. In every man, also, these three materials exist. When the sattva material prevails, knowledge comes. When the rajas material prevails, activity comes, and when the tamas material prevails, darkness comes, and lassitude, idleness, ignorance.
Drashta Drishimatraha Shuddhopi Pratyayanupashyaha.
The seer is intelligence only, and though pure, seen through the coloring of the intellect. This is again Sankhya philosophy. We have seen from this philosophy that, from the lowest form, up to intelligence, all is nature, but beyond nature are purusas, souls, and these have no qualities. Then how does the soul appear to be happy or unhappy? By reflection. Just as if a piece of pure crystal be put on a table and a red flower be put near it, the crystal appears to be red, so all these appearances of happiness or unhappiness are but reflections. The soul itself has no sort of coloring. The soul is separate from nature. Nature is one thing, soul another, eternally separate. The Sankhya's say that intelligence is a compound, that it grows and wanes, that it changes just as the body changes, and that its nature is nearly the same as that of the body. As a fingernail is to the body, so is body to intelligence. The nail is a part of the body, but it can be pared off hundreds of times, and the body will still last. Similarly, the intelligence lasts eons, while this body can be pared off, thrown off. Yet intelligence cannot be immortal, because it changes growing and waning. Anything that changes cannot be immortal. Certainly intelligence is manufactured, and that very fact shows us that there must be something beyond that, because it cannot be free. Everything connected with matter is in nature, and therefore, bound for ever. Who is free? That free one must certainly be beyond cause and effect. If you say that the idea of freedom is a delusion, I will say that the idea of bondage is also a delusion. Two facts come into our consciousness and stand or fall by each other. One is that we are bound. If we want to go through a wall and our head bumps against that wall, we are limited by that wall. At the same time we find will and think, we can direct our will everywhere. At every step these contradictory ideas are coming to us.
Tadartha eva drishyasya.
The nature of the experience is for him. Nature has no light of its own. As long as the Purusa is present in it, it appears light, but the light is borrowed, just as the moon's light is reflected. All the manifestations of nature are caused by this nature itself, according to the yogis, but nature has no purpose in view, except to free the Purusa.
Kritartham pratinashtamapyanashtam tadanyasadharanatvat.
Though destroyed for him whose goal has been gained, yet is not destroyed, being common to others. The whole idea of this nature is to make the soul know that it is entirely separate from nature, and when the soul knows this, nature has no more attractions for it. But the whole of nature vanishes only for that man who has become free. There will always remain an infinite number of others for whom nature will go on working.
Swaswami shaktyoho swarupopalabdhi hetuhu sanyogaha.
Junction is the cause of the realization of the nature of both the powers, the experienced, and its Lord. According to this aphorism, when this soul comes into conjunction with nature, both the power of the soul and the power of nature become manifest in this conjunction, and all these manifestations are thrown out. Ignorance is the cause of this conjunction. We see every day that the cause of our pain or pleasure is always our joining ourselves with the body. If I were perfectly certain that I am not this body, I should take no notice of heat and cold or anything of the kind. This body is a combination. It is only a fiction to say that I have one body, you another, and the sun another. The whole universe is one ocean of matter, and you are the name of a little particle, and I have another, and the sun of another. We know that this matter is continuously changing. What is forming the sun one day, the next day may form the matter of our bodies.
Tasya heturavidya.
Junction is the cause of the realization of the nature of both the powers, the experienced, and its Lord. According to this aphorism, when this soul comes into conjunction with nature, both the power of the soul and the power of nature become manifest in this conjunction, and all these manifestations are thrown out. Ignorance is the cause of this conjunction. We see every day that the cause of our pain or pleasure is always our joining ourselves with the body. If I were perfectly certain that I am not this body, I should take no notice of heat and cold or anything of the kind. This body is a combination. It is only a fiction to say that I have one body, you another, and the sun another. The whole universe is one ocean of matter, and you are the name of a little particle, and I have another, and the sun of another. We know that this matter is continuously changing. What is forming the sun one day, the next day may form the matter of our bodies.
Tadabhavat sanyoga bhavohanam tadrushe kaivalyam.
There being absence of that ignorance, there is absence of junction, which is the thing to be avoided, that is the independence of the seer. According to this yoga philosophy, it is through ignorance that the soul has been joined with nature, and the idea is to get rid of nature's control over us. That is the goal of all religions. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work, or worship, or psychic control, or by philosophy, by one, or more, or all of these and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines, or dogmas, or rituals, or books, or temples, or forms are but secondary details. The yogi tries to reach this goal through psychic control. Until we can free ourselves from nature, we are slaves. As she dictates, so we must go. The yogi claims that he who controls mind controls matter also. The internal nature is much higher than the external and much more difficult to grapple with, much more difficult to control. Therefore, he who has conquered the internal nature controls the whole universe. It becomes his servant. Raja Yoga propounds the methods of gaining this control. Higher forces than we know in physical nature will have to be subdued. This body is just the external crust of the mind. They are not two different things. They are just as the oyster in its shell. They are but two aspects of one thing. The internal substance of the oyster is taking up matter from outside and manufacturing the shell. In the same way, these internal fine forces, which are called mind, take up gross matter from outside and from that manufacture this external shell or body. If then we have control of the internal, it is very easy to have control of the external. Then again, these forces are not different. It is not that some forces are physical and some mental. The physical forces are but the gross manifestations of the fine forces, just as the physical world is but the gross manifestation of the fine world.
Viveka khyatira viplavahanopayah.
The means of destruction of ignorance is unbroken practice of discrimination. This is the real goal of practice, discrimination between the real and unreal, knowing that the Purusa is not nature, that it is neither matter nor mind, and that because it is not nature, it cannot possibly change. It is only nature which changes, combining and recombining, dissolving continually. When through constant practice, we begin to discriminate, ignorance will vanish, and the Purusa will begin to shine in its real nature, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent.
Tasya saptadha pranta bhumi prajna.
His knowledge is of the sevenfold highest ground. When this knowledge comes, it will come, as it were, in 7 grades, one after the other, and when one of these has begun, we may know that we are getting knowledge. The first to appear will be that we have known what is to be known, the mind will cease to be dissatisfied. While we are aware of thirsting after knowledge, we begin to seek here and there, wherever we think we can get some truth, and, failing to find it, we become dissatisfied and seek in a fresh direction. All search is vain until we begin to perceive that knowledge is within ourselves, that no one can help us, that we must help ourselves. When we begin to practice the power of discrimination, the first sign that we are getting near truth will be that dissatisfied state will vanish. We shall feel quite sure that we have found the truth and that it cannot be anything else but the truth. Then we may know that the sun is rising, that the morning is breaking for us, and, taking courage, we must persevere until the goal is reached. The second grade will be that all pains will be gone. It will be impossible for anything in the universe, physical, mental, or spiritual, to give us pain. The third will be that we shall get full knowledge, that omniscience will be ours.
Yoganganushthanadashuddhikshaye jnanadiptiravivekkyatehe.
By the practice of the different parts of yoga, the impurities being destroyed, knowledge becomes effulgent, up to discrimination. Now comes the practical knowledge. What we have just been speaking about is much higher. It is way above our heads, but it is the ideal. It is first necessary to obtain physical and mental control. Then the realization will become steady in that ideal. The ideal being known, what remains is to practice the method of reaching it.
Yamaniyamāsana pranayama pratyahara dharana dhyana samadhayoštavangani.
Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi are the limbs of yoga.
Ahimsa satya steya brahmacharya parigraha yamaha.
Non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, continence, and non-receiving are called yama. A man who wants to be a perfect yogi must give up the sex idea. The soul has no sex. Why should it degrade itself with sex ideas? Later we shall understand better why these ideas must be given up. Receiving is just as bad as stealing, receiving gifts from others. Whoever receives gifts, his mind is acted on by the mind of the giver, so that the man who receives gifts becomes degenerated. Receiving gifts destroys the independence of the mind and makes us mere slaves. Therefore, receive nothing.
Jati desha kala samayanavachinnaha sarvabhauma mahavratam.
These, unbroken by time, place, purpose, and caste, are universal great vows. These practices, non-killing, non-stealing, chastity, and non-receiving, are to be practiced by every man, woman, and child, by every soul, irrespective of nation, country, or position.
Shaucha santosha tapah swadhyayeshvara pranidhanani niyamaha.
Internal and external purification, contentment, mortification, study, and worship of God are the niyamas. External purification is keeping the body pure. A dirty man will never become a yogi. There must be internal purification also. That is obtained by the first named virtues. Of course, internal purity is of greater value than external, but both are necessary, and external purity without internal is of no good.
Vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavanam.
To obstruct thoughts, which are inimical to yoga, contrary thoughts will be brought. This is the way to practice all these virtues that have been stated by holding thoughts of an opposite character in the mind. When the idea of stealing comes, non-stealing should be thought of. When the idea of receiving gifts comes, replace it by a contrary thought.
Vitarka himsadayah कृतकारितानुमोदिता लोभक्रोधमोहपूर्वका मृदुमध्याधिमात्रा दुःखाज्ञानानन्तफला इति प्रतिपक्षभावनम्. The
obstructions to yoga are killing, etc., whether committed, caused, or approved, either through avarice, or anger, or ignorance, whether slight, middling, or great, and result is innumerable ignorances and miseries. This is the method of thinking the contrary. If I tell I lie, or cause another to tell a lie, or approve of another doing so, it is equally sinful. If it is a very mild lie, it is still a lie. Every vicious thought will rebound, every thought of hatred which you have thought, in a cave even, is stored up, and will one day come back to you with tremendous power in the form of some misery here. If you project all sorts of hatred and jealousy, they will rebound on you with compound interest. No power can avert them. When once you have put them in motion, you will have to bear them. Remembering this will prevent you from doing wicked things.
Ahimsa pratisthayam tatsannidhau vairatyagaha.
Non-killing being established, in his presence all enmities cease in others. If a man gets the idea of non-injuring others, before him even animals which are by their nature ferocious will become peaceful. The tiger and the lamb will play together before that yogi and will not hurt each other. When you have come to that state, then alone you will understand that you have become firmly established and non-injuring.
Satya pratisthayam kriyaphalashrayatvam.
By the establishment of truthfulness, the yogi gets the power of attaining for himself and others the fruits of work without the works. When this power of truth will be established with you, then even in dream you will never tell an untruth, in thought, word or deed, whatever you say will be truth. You may say to a man be blessed, and that man will be blessed. If a man is diseased, and you say to him, be thou cured, he will be cured immediately.
Asteya pratisthayam sarvaratnopasthanam.
By the establishment of non-stealing, all wealth comes to the yogi. The more you fly from nature, the more she follows you, and if you do not care for her at all, she becomes your slave.
Brahmacharya pratisthayam viryalabhaha.
By the establishment of continence, energy is gained. The chaste brain has tremendous energy, gigantic willpower. Without that there can be no mental strength. All men of gigantic brains are very continent. It gives wonderful control over mankind. Leaders of men have been very continent, and this is what gave them power. Therefore, the yogi must be continent.
Aparigrahasthairye janma kathanta sambodhaha.
When he is fixed in non-receiving, he gets the memory of past life. When the yogi does not receive presents from others, he does not become beholden to others, but becomes independent and free, and his mind becomes pure, because, with every gift he receives all the evils of the giver, and they come and lay coating after coating on his mind, until it is hidden under all sorts of coverings of evil. If he does not receive, the mind becomes pure, and the first thing it gets is memory of past life. Then alone, the yogi becomes perfectly fixed in his ideal, because he sees that he has been coming and going so many times, and he becomes determined that this time he will be free, that he will no more come and go, and be the slave of nature.
Shauchat swangajugupsa parairasamsargaha.
Internal and external cleanliness being established, arises disgust for one's own body and non-intercourse with other bodies. When there is real purification of the body, external and internal, there arises neglect of the body, and all this idea of keeping it nice will vanish. What others call the most beautiful face, to the yogi, will appear to be an animal's face if there is not intelligence behind it. What the world will call a very common face, he will call heavenly if that spirit shines behind it. This thirst after body is the great bane of human life. So, when this purity is established, the first sign will be that you do not care to think you are a body. It is only when purity comes that we get rid of this body idea.
Sattva shuddhi saumanasyaikagryendriya jayatma darshana yogyatvani cha.
There also arises purification of the sattva, cheerfulness of the mind, concentration, conquest of the organs, and fitness for the realization of the self. By this practice, the sattva material will prevail, and the mind will become concentrated and cheerful. The first sign that you are become religious is that you are becoming cheerful. When a man is gloomy, that may be dyspepsia, but it is not religion. A pleasurable feeling is the nature of the sattva. Everything is pleasurable to the sattvika man, and when this comes, know that you are progressing in yoga. All pain is caused by tamas, so you must get rid of that. Moroseness is one of the results of tamas. The strong, the well-knit, the young, the healthy, the daring alone are fit to be yogis. To the yogi everything is bliss, every human face that he sees brings cheerfulness to him. That is the sign of a virtuous man. Misery is caused by sin, and by no other cause. What business have you with clouded faces? It is terrible. If you have a clouded face, do not go out that day, shut yourself up in your room. What right have you to carry this disease out into the world? When your mind has become controlled, you will have control over the whole body. Instead of being a slave to the machine will be your slave. Instead of this machine being able to drag the soul down, it will be its greatest helpmate.
Santoshadanutama sukhalabhaha.
From contentment comes superlative happiness.
Kayendriya siddhirashuddhikshayat tapasaha.
The result of mortification is bringing powers to the organs and the body by destroying the impurity. The results of mortification are seen immediately, sometimes by heightened powers of vision, and so on, hearing things at a distance, etc.
Swadhyayad ishtadevata samprayogaha.
By repetition of the mantra comes the realization of the intended deity. The higher the beings that you want to get, the harder is the practice.
Samadhi siddhirishvara pranidhanat.
By sacrificing all to Isvara comes samadhi. By resignation to the Lord, samadhi becomes perfect.
Sthira sukhamasanam.
Posture is that which is firm and pleasant. Now comes asana, posture. Until you can get a firm seat, you cannot practice the breathing and other exercises. The seat being firm means that you do not feel the body at all, then alone it has become firm. But, in the ordinary way, you will find that, as soon as you sit for a few minutes, all sorts of disturbances come into the body. But when you have got beyond the idea of a concrete body, you will lose all sense of the body. You will feel neither pleasure nor pain. And when you take your body up again, it will feel so rested. It is the only perfect rest that you can give to the body. When you have succeeded in conquering the body and keeping it firm, your practice will remain firm. But while you are disturbed by the body, your nerves become disturbed and you cannot concentrate the mind. We can make the seat firm by thinking of the infinite. We cannot think of the absolute infinite, but we can think of the infinite sky.
Prayatna shaithilyananta samapattibhyam.
By slight effort and meditating on the unlimited posture becomes firm and pleasant. Light and darkness, pleasure and pain will not then disturb you.
Tato dvandvan abhighataha.
Seat being conquered, the dualities do not obstruct. The dualities are good and bad, heat and cold, and all the pairs of opposites.
Tasmin sati shvasa prashvasayorgati vichhedaha pranayamaha.
Controlling the motion of the exhalation and the inhalation follows after this. When the posture has been conquered, then this motion is to be broken and controlled, and thus, we come to pranayama, the controlling of the vital forces of the body. Prana is not breath, though it is usually so translated. It is the sum total of the cosmic energy. It is the energy that is in each body, and its most apparent manifestation is the motion of the lungs. This motion is caused by prana drawing in the breath, and is what we seek to control in pranayama. We begin by controlling the breath as the easiest way of getting control of the prana.
Bahyabhyantarastambhavrittirdeshakala sankhyaabhihi paridrushto dirgha sukshmaha.
Its modifications are either external or internal or motionless, regulated by place, time, and number, either long or short. The three sorts of motion of this pranayama are, one by which we draw the breath in, another by which we throw it out, and the third action is when the breath is held in the lungs or stopped from entering the lungs. These, again, are varied by place and time. By place is meant that the prana is held to some particular part of the body. By time is meant how long the prana should be confined to a certain place, and so we are told how many seconds to keep on motion and how many seconds to keep another. The result of this pranayama is ajata, awakening the kundalini.
Bahyabhyantara vishayakshepi chaturthaha.
The fourth is restraining the prana by directing it either to the external or internal objects. This is the fourth sort of pranayama. Prana can be directed either inside or outside.
Tatah kshiyate prakashavaranam.
From that, the covering to the light of the chitta is attenuated. The chitta has, by its own nature, all knowledge. It is made of sattva particles, but is covered by rajas and tamas particles, and by pranayama this covering is removed.
धारणासु च योग्यता मनसः.
The mind becomes fit for dharana. After this covering has been removed, we are able to concentrate the mind.
स्वविषया संप्रयोगे चित्तस्वरूपानुकार इवेन्द्रियाणां प्रत्याहारः.
The drawing in of the organs is by their giving up their own objects and taking the form of the mind stuff. These organs are separate states of the mind stuff. I see a book. The form is not in the book, it is in the mind. Something is outside which calls that form up. The real form is in the chitta. These organs are identifying themselves with and taking the forms of whatever comes to them. If you can restrain the mind stuff from taking these forms, the mind will remain calm. This is called pratyahara. Then arises supreme control of the organs. When the yogi has succeeded in preventing the organs from taking the forms of external objects and in making them remain one with the mind stuff, then comes perfect control of the organs, and when the organs are perfectly under control, every muscle and nerve will be under control, because the organs are the centers of all the sensations and of all actions. These organs are divided into organs of work and organs of sensation. When the organs are controlled, the yogi can control all feeling and doing. The whole of the body will be under his control. Then alone one begins to feel joy in being born. Then one can truthfully say, "Blessed am I that I was born." When that control of the organs is obtained, we feel how wonderful this body really is.
ततः परमावश्यतेन्द्रियाणाम्.
Pratyahara results in the absolute control of the sense organs.
तृतीयोऽध्यायः विभूतिपादः. देशबन्धश्चित्तस्य धारणा.
Dharana is holding the mind onto some particular object. Dharana concentration is when the mind holds on to some object, either in the body or outside the body, and keeps itself in that state.
तत्र प्रत्ययैकतानता ध्यानम्.
An unbroken flow of knowledge to that object is dhyana. The mind tries to think of one object, to hold itself to one particular spot, as the top of the head, the heart, etc. And if the mind succeeds in receiving the sensations only through that part of the body and through no other part, that would be dharana. And when the mind succeeds in keeping itself in that state for some time, it is called dhyana meditation.
तदेवार्थमात्रनिर्भासं स्वरूपशून्यमिव समाधिः.
When that, giving up all forms, reflects only the meaning, it is samadhi. That is, when in meditation all forms are given up. Suppose I were meditating on a book, and that I have gradually succeeded in concentrating the mind on it and perceiving only the internal sensations, the meaning, unexpressed in any form, that state of dhyana is called samadhi.
त्रयमेकत्र संयमः.
These three when practiced, in regard to one object is samyama. When a man can direct his mind to any particular object and fix it there, and then keep it there for a long time, separating the object from the internal part, this is samyama. Or dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, one following the other, and making one. The form of the thing has vanished, and only its meaning remains in the mind.
तज्जयात् प्रज्ञालोकः.
By the conquest of that comes light of knowledge. When one has succeeded in making this samyama, all powers come under his control. This is the great instrument of the yogi. The object of knowledge are infinite, and they are divided into the gross, grosser, grossest, and the fine, finer, finest, and so on. This samyama should be first applied to gross things. When you begin to get knowledge of the gross, slowly, by stages, it should be brought to finer things.
तस्य भूमिषु विनियोगः.
That should be employed in stages. This is a note of warning, not to attempt to go too fast.
त्रयमन्तरङ्गं पूर्वेभ्यः.
These three are nearer than those that precede. Before these we had the pranayama, the asana, the yama and niyama. These are external parts of these three, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Yet these latter even are external to the seedless samadhi. When a man has attained to them, he may attain to omniscience and omnipresence, but that would not be salvation. These three would not make the mind nirvikalpa, changeless, but would leave the seeds for getting bodies again. Only when the seeds are, as the yogi says, fried, do they lose the possibility of producing further plants. These powers cannot fry the seed.
Tadapi bahirangam nirbijasya.
But even they are external to the seedless samadhi. Compared with that seedless samadhi, therefore, even these are external. We have not yet reached the real samadhi, the highest, but to a lower stage, in which this universe still exists as we see it, and in which are all these power.
Vyutthana nirodha samskarayorabhibhava pradurbhavau nirodha kshana chittanvayo nirodha parinamaha.
By the suppression of the disturbed modifications of the mind, and by the rise of modifications of control, the mind is said to attain the controlling modifications, following the controlling powers of the mind. That is to say, in this first state of samadhi, the modifications of the mind have been controlled, but not perfectly, because if they were, there would be no modifications. If there is a modification which impels the mind to rush out through the senses, and the yogi tries to control it, that very control itself will be a modification. One wave will be checked by another wave, so it will not be real samadhi when all the waves have subsided, as control itself will be a wave. Yet this lower samadhi is very much nearer to the higher samadhi than when the mind comes bubbling out.
Tasya prashantavahita sanskarat.
Its flow becomes steady by habit. The flow of this continuous control of the mind becomes steady when practices day after day, and the mind obtains the faculty of constant concentration.
Sarvarthataikagratayoho kshayodayo chittasya samadhi parinamaha.
Taking in all sorts of objects and concentrating upon one object, these two powers being destroyed and manifested respectively, the chitta gets the modification called samadhi. The mind is taking up various objects, running into all sorts of things, and then there is a higher state of the mind when it takes up one object and excludes all others. Samadhi is the result of that.
Tataha punah shantoditau tulya pratyayau chittasyaiकाग्रता parinamaha.
The one-pointedness of the chitta is when it grasps in one, the past and present. How are we to know that the mind has become concentrated? Because time will vanish. The more time vanishes, the more concentrated we are. In common life, we see that when we are interested in a book, we do not note the time at all, and when we leave the book, we are often surprised to find how many hours have passed. All time will have the tendency to come and stand in the one present. So the definition is given: when the past and present come and stand in one, the more concentrated the mind.
Etena bhutendriyeshu dharma lakshana avastha parinama vyakhyataha.
By this is explained the threefold transformations of form, time and state, in fine or gross matter, and in the organs. By this the threefold changes in the mind stuff as to form, time, and state are explained. The mind stuff is changing into vrittis, this is change as to form. To be able to hold the changes to the present time is change as to time. To be able to make the mind stuff go to the past forms giving up the present even, is change as to state. The concentrations taught in the preceding aphorisms were to give the yogi a voluntary control over the transformations of his mind stuff, which alone will enable him to make the samyama before named.
Shantodita vyapadeshya dharmanupati dharmi.
That which is acted upon by transformations, either past, present or yet, to be manifested, is the qualified. That is to say, the qualified is the substance, which is being acted upon by time, and by the samskaras, and getting changed, and being manifested all the time.
Kramanyatvam parinamanyatve hetuhu.
The succession of changes is the cause of manifold evolution.
Parinamatraya sanyamad atitanagata jnanam.
By making samyama on the three sorts of changes comes the knowledge of past and future. We must not lose sight of the first definition of samyama. When the mind has attained to that state, when it identifies itself with the internal impression of the object, leaving the external, and when, by long practice, that is retained by the mind, and the mind can get into that state in a moment, that is samyama. If a man in that state wants to know the past and future, he has to make a samyama on the changes in the samskaras. Some are working now at present, some have worked out, and some are waiting to work. So, by making a samyama on these he knows the past and future.
शब्दार्थप्रत्ययानामितरेतराध्यासात् संकरस्तत्प्रविभागसंयमात् सर्वभूतर्थज्ञानम्.
By making samyama on word, meaning, and knowledge, which are ordinarily confused, comes the knowledge of all animal sounds. The word represents the external cause, the meaning represents the internal vibration that travels to the brain through the channels of the indriyas, conveying the external impression to the mind, and knowledge represents the reaction of the mind, with which comes perception. These three confused make our sense objects. Suppose I hear a word. There is first the external vibration, next the internal sensation carried to the mind by the organ of hearing, then the mind reacts, and I know the word. The word I know is a mixture of the three: vibration, sensation, and reaction. Ordinarily these three are inseparable. But by practice, the yogi can separate them. When a man has attained to this, if he makes a samyama on any sound, he understands the meaning which that sound was intended to express, whether it was made by man or by any other animal.
संस्कार साक्षात्करणात् पूर्वजाति ज्ञानम्.
By perceiving the impressions, knowledge of past life. Each experience that we have comes in the form of a wave in the chitta, and this subsides and becomes finer and finer, but is never lost. It remains there in minute form, and if we can bring this wave up again, it becomes memory. So, if the yogi can make a samyama on these past impressions in the mind, he will begin to remember all his past lives.
प्रत्ययस्य परचित्तज्ञानम्.
By making samyama on the signs in another's, both knowledge of that mind comes. Suppose each man has particular signs on his body, which differentiate him from others. When the yogi makes a samyama on these signs, peculiar to a certain man, he knows the nature of the mind of that person.
न च तत्सालम्बनं तस्या विषयीभूतत्वात्.
But not its contents, that not being the object of the samyama. He would not know the contents of the mind by making a samyama on the body. There would be required a twofold samyama, first on the signs in the body, and then on the mind itself. The yogi would then know everything that is in that mind, past, present, and future.
कायरूपसंयमात् तद्ग्राह्यशक्तिस्तम्भे चक्षुः प्रकाशासंप्रयोगेऽन्तर्धानम्.
By making samyama on the form of the body, the power of perceiving forms being obstructed, the power of manifestation in the eye being separated, the yogi's body becomes unseen. A yogi standing in the midst of this room can apparently vanish. He does not really vanish, but he will not be seen by anyone. The form and the body are, as it were, separated. You must remember that this can only be done when the yogi has attained to that power of concentration, when form and the thing formed have been separated. Then he makes a samyama on that, and the power to perceive forms is obstructed, because the power of perceiving forms comes from the junction of form and the thing formed.
सोपक्रमं निरुपक्रमं च कर्म तत्संयमादपरान्तज्ञानमरिष्टेभ्यो वा.
By this the disappearance, or concealment of words which are being spoken is also explained.
मैत्र्यादिषु बलानि.
Karma is of two kinds, soon to be fructified and late to be fructified. By making samyama on that, or by the signs called aristha, portents, the yogis know the exact time of separation from their bodies. When the yogi makes a samyama on his own karma, upon those impressions in his mind, which are now working, and those which are just waiting to work, he knows exactly by those that are waiting when his body will fall. He knows when he will die, at what hour, even at what minute. The Hindus think very much of that knowledge or consciousness of the nearness of death, because it is taught in the Gita that the thoughts at the moment of departure are great powers in determining the next life.
बलेषु हस्ति बलादीनि.
By making samyama on friendship, etc., various strength comes.
प्रवृत्त्यालोकन्यासात् सूक्ष्मव्यवहितविप्रकृष्टज्ञानम्.
By making samyama on the strength of the elephant, etc., that strength comes to the yogi. When a yogi has attained to this samyama and wants strength, he makes a samyama on the strength of the elephant and gets it. Infinite energy is at the disposal of everyone if he only knows how to get it. The yogi has discovered the science of getting it.
Bhuvanajnanam surye sanyamat.
By making samyama on that effulgent light comes the knowledge of the fine, the obstructed, and the remote. When the yogi makes samyama on that effulgent light in the heart, he sees things which are very remote, things, for instance, that are happening in a distant place and which are obstructed by mountain barriers, and also things which are very fine.
Chandre tara vyuha jnanam.
By making samyama on the sun comes knowledge of the world.
Dhruve tadgati jnanam.
On the moon comes the knowledge of the cluster of stars.
Nabhichakre kaya vyuha jnanam.
On the pole star comes the knowledge of the motions of the stars.
Kanthakupe kshutpipasa nivrittihi.
On the navel circle comes the knowledge of the constitution of the body.
Kurmanadyam sthairyam.
On the hollow of the throat comes cessation of hunger. When a man is very hungry, if he can make samyama on the pit of the throat, hunger ceases.
Murdha jyotishi siddha darshanam.
On the nerve called karma comes fixity of the body. When he is practicing, the body is not disturbed.
Pratibhadva sarvam.
On the light emanating from the top of the head side of the siddhas. The siddhas are beings who are a little above ghosts. When the yogi concentrates his mind on the sop of his head, he will see these siddhas. The word siddha does not refer to those men who have become free, a sense in which it is often used.
Hridaye chitta samvit.
Or by the power of pratibha, all knowledge. All these can come without any samyama to the man who has the power of pratibha, enlightenment from purity. This is when a man has risen to a high state of pratibha, then he has that great light. All things are apparent to him. Everything comes to him naturally, without making samyama on anything.
Sattva purushayoratyanta sankirnayoho pratyaya vishesho bhogaha pararthatvat swartha sanyamat purusha jnanam.
In the heart, knowledge of minds.
Tatah pratibha shravana vedana darsha svadavarta jayante.
Enjoyment comes by the non-discrimination of the very distant soul, and sattva. Its actions are for another. Samyama on this gives knowledge of the purusa. This power of non-attachment acquired through purity gives the yogi the enlightenment called pratibha.
Te samadha upasarga vyutthane siddhayah.
From that arises the knowledge of hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling, belonging to pratibha.
Bandhakarana shaithilyat prachara samvedanacha chittasya parasharirāveshah.
These are obstacles to samadhi, but they are powers in the worldly state. If the yogi knows all these enjoyments of the world, it comes by the junction of the purusa and the mind. If he wants to make samyama on this, that they are two different things, nature and soul, he gets knowledge of the purusa. From that arises discrimination. When he has got that discrimination, he gets the pratibha, the light of supreme genius. These powers, however, are obstructions to the attainment of the highest goal, the knowledge of the pure self, and freedom. These are, as it were, to be met in the way, and if the yogi rejects them, he attains the highest. If he is tempted to acquire these, his farther progress is barred.
Udana jaya jalapanka kantaka dishvasanga utkrantischa.
When the cause of bondage has become loosened, the yogi, by his knowledge of manifestation through the organs, enters another's body. The yogi can enter a dead body and make it get up and move, even while he himself is working in another body. Or he can enter a living body and hold that man's mind and organs in check, and for the time being act through the body of that man. That is done by the yogi coming to this discrimination of purusa and nature. If he wants to enter another's body, he makes a samyama on that body and enters it, because not only is his soul omnipresent, but his mind also, according to the yogi. It is one bit of the universal mind. Now, however, it can only work through the nerve currents in this body, but when the yogi has loosened himself from these nerve currents, he will be able to work through other things.
Samanajaya jvalanam.
By conquering the current called Udana, the yogi does not sink in water or in swamps, and he can walk on thorns. Udana is the name of the nerve current that governs the lungs and all the upper parts of the body, and when he is master of it, he becomes light in weight. He cannot sink in water, he can walk on thorns and sard bowls and stand in fire, and so on.
Shrotraakashayo sambandha sanyama divyam shrotram.
By the conquest of the current samana, he is surrounded by blaze. Whenever he likes, light flashes from his body.
Kayakashayoho sambandha sanyama laghutula samapattescha
By making samyama on the relation between the ear and the akasa comes divine hearing. There is the akasa, the ether, and the instrument, the ear. By making samyama on them, the yogi gets divine hearing. He hears everything. Anything spoken or sounded miles away he can hear.
Bahirakalpita vrittir mahavideha tatah prakashavaranakshayaha.
By making samyama on the relation between the akasa and the body, the yogi becoming light as cotton wool goes through the skies. This akasa is the material of this body, it is only akasa in a certain form that has become the body. If the yogi makes samyama on this akasa material of his body, it acquires the lightness of akasa and can go anywhere through the air.
Sthula swarupa sukshman vayarthavatva sanyamadbhuta jayaha.
By making samyama on the real modifications of the mind, which are outside, called great disembodiedness, comes disappearance of the covering to light. The mind in its foolishness thinks that it is working in this body. Why should I be bound by one system of nerves and put the ego only in one body if the mind is omnipresent? There is no reason why I should. The yogi wants to feel the ego wherever he likes. When he has succeeded in that, all covering to light goes away and all darkness and ignorance vanish. Everything appear to him to be full of knowledge.
Tatornimadi pradurbhavaha kaya sampatta dharmanabhighatascha.
By making samyama on the elements, beginning with the gross and ending with the superfine, comes mastery of the elements. The yogi makes samyama on the elements, first on the gross and then on the finer states. This samyama is taken up more by a sect of the Buddhists. They take a lump of clay and make samyama on that, and gradually they begin to see the fine materials of which it is composed, and when they have known all the fine materials in it, they get power over that element. So, with all the elements, the yogi can conquer them all.
Rupalavanya balavajra samhananatvani kaya sampat.
From that comes minuteness, and the rest of the powers, glorification of the body, and indestructibleness of the bodily qualities. This means that the yogi has attained the 8 powers. He can make himself as light as a particle, he can make himself huge, as heavy as the earth, or as light as the air. He will rule everything he wants, he will conquer everything he wants, alien will sit at his feet like a lamb. And all his desires be fulfilled at will.
Grahana smitan vayarthavatva sanyamadindriya jayaha.
The glorifications of the body are beauty, complexion, strength, adamantine hardness. The body becomes indestructible. Fire cannot injure it. Nothing can injure it. Nothing can destroy it until the yogi wishes. Breaking the rod of time, he lives in this universe with his body. In the Vedas it is written that for that man, there is no more disease, death or pain.
Tato manojavitvam vikarana bhava pradhana jayascha.
By making samyama on the objectivity, knowledge and egoism of the organs, by gradation, comes the conquest of the organs. In perception of external objects, the organs leave their place in the mind and go towards the object, that is followed by knowledge and egoism. When the yogi makes samyama on these by gradation, he conquers the organs. Take up anything that you see or feel, a book for instance, and first concentrate the mind on the thing itself. Then on the knowledge that it is in the form of a book, and then the ego that sees the book. By that practice all the organs will be conquers.
सत्त्वपुरुषान्यताख्यातिमात्रस्य सर्वभावाधिष्ठातृत्वं सर्वज्ञातृत्वं च.
From that comes glorified mind, power of the organs independently of the body, and conquest of nature. Just as by the conquest of the elements comes glorified body, so, from the conquest of the mind, will come glorified mind.
तद्वैराग्यादपि दोषबीजक्षये कैवल्यम्.
By making samyama on the sattva, to him who has discriminated between the intellect and the purusa comes omnipresence and omniscience. When we have conquered nature and realized the difference between the purusa and nature, that the purusa is indestructible, pure and perfect, when the yogi has realized this, then comes omnipotence and omniscience.
स्थान्युपनिमन्त्रणे संगस्मया करणं पुनरनिष्टप्रसङ्गात्.
By giving up even these, comes the destruction of the very seat of evil, he attains kavalya. He attains aloneness, independence. Then that man is free. When he gives up even the ideas of omnipotence and omniscience, there will be entire rejection of enjoyment of the temptations from celestial beings. When the yogi has seen all these wonderful powers and rejected them, he reaches the goal. What are all these powers? Simply manifestations. They are no better than dreams. Even omnipotence is a dream. It depends on the mind. So long as there is a mind, it can be understood, but the goal is beyond even the mind.
क्षणतत्क्रमयोः संयमाद्विवेकजं ज्ञानम्.
The yogi should not feel allured or flattered by the overtures of celestial beings for fear of evil again. There are other dangers too. Gods and other beings come to tempt the yogi. They do not want anyone to be perfectly free. They are jealous, just as we are, and worse than we, sometimes. They are very much afraid of losing their places. Those yogis who do not reach perfection die and become gods, leaving the direct road, they go into one of the side streets and get these powers. Then again they have to be born, but he who is strong enough to withstand these temptations and goes straight to the goal becomes free.
जातिलक्षणदेशैरन्यतानवच्छेदात् तुल्ययोस्ततः प्रतिपत्तिः.
By making samyama on a particle of time and its multiples comes discrimination. How are we to avoid all these things, these devas and heavens and powers? By discrimination, by knowing good from evil. Therefore a samyama is given by which the power of discrimination can be strengthened. This is by making samyama on a particle of time.
तारकं सर्वविषयं सर्वथा विषयम् अक्रमं चेति विवेकजं ज्ञानम्.
Those which cannot be differentiated by species, sign and place, even they will be discriminated by the above samyama. The misery that we suffer comes from ignorance, from non-discrimination between the real and the unreal. We all take the bad for the good, the dream for the reality. Soul is the only reality, and we have forgotten it. Body is an unreal dream, and we think we are all bodies. This non-discrimination is the cause of misery, and it is caused by ignorance. When discrimination comes, it brings strength, and then alone can we avoid all these various ideas of body, heavens, and gods and devas. This ignorance arises through differentiating by species, sign or place. For instance, take a cow. The cow is differentiated from the dog as species. Even with the cows alone, how do we make the distinction between one cow and another? By signs. If two objects are exactly similar, they can be distinguished if they are in different places. When objects are so mixed up that even these differentiae will not help us, the power of discrimination acquired by the above-mentioned practice will give us the ability to distinguish them. The highest philosophy of the yogi is based upon this fact, that the purusa is pure and perfect, and is the only simple that exists in this universe. The body and mind are compounds, and yet, we are ever identifying ourselves with them. That is the great mistake that the distinction has been lost. When this power of discrimination has been attained, man sees that everything in this world, mental and physical, is a compound and, as such, cannot be the Purusa.
Sattva-purushayoho shuddhi-samye kaivalyamiti.
The saving knowledge is that knowledge of discrimination which covers all objects, all means saving, because the knowledge takes the yogi across the ocean of birth and death. The whole of Prakriti in all its states, subtle and gross, is within the grasp of this knowledge. There is no succession in perfection by this knowledge. It takes in all things simultaneously, at a glance.
Iti patanjali virachite yoga sutre tritiyaha vibhuti padaha.
By the similarity of purity between the sattva and the purusa comes Kaivalya. When the soul realizes that it depends on nothing in the universe, from gods to the lowest atom, that it is called Kaivalya, isolation, and perfection. It is attained when this mixture of purity and impurity called mind has been made as pure as the purusa itself. Then the sattva, the mind, reflects only the unqualified essence of purity, which is the purusa.
Chaturtho dhyayaha Kaivalya padaha Janmaushadhi mantra tapah samadhija siddhayaha.
The siddhis powers are attained by birth, chemical means, power of words, mortification, or concentration. Sometimes a man is born with the siddhis powers, of course from the exercise of powers he had in his previous birth. In this birth he is born, as it were, to enjoy the fruits of them. It is said of Kapila, the great father of the Sankhya philosophy, that he was a born siddha, which means, literally, a man who has attained to success. The yogis claim that these powers can be gained by chemical means. All of you know that chemistry originally began as alchemy. Men went in search of the philosopher's stone and elixirs of life, and so forth. In India, there was a sect called the Rasayanas. Their idea was that ideality, knowledge, spirituality and religion were all very right, but that the body was the only instrument by which to attain to all these. If the body broke now and then, it would take so much more time to attain to the goal. For instance, a man wants to practice yoga or wants to become spiritual.
Jatyantara parinamah prakritya purat.
The change into another species is by the filling in of nature. Patanjali has advanced the proposition that these powers come by first, sometimes by chemical means, or they may be got by mortification, and he has admitted that this body can be kept for any length of time. Now he goes on to state what is the cause of the change of the body into another species, which he says is by the filling in of nature. In the next aphorism he will explain this.
Nimittam aprayojakam prakritinam varana bhedastu tatah kshetrikavat.
Good deeds, etc., are not the direct causes in the transformation of nature, but they act as breakers of obstacles to the evolutions of nature, as a farmer breaks the obstacles to the course of water, which then runs down by its own nature. When a farmer is irrigating his field, the water is already in the canals, only there are gates which keep the water in. The farmer opens these gates, and the water flows in by itself, by the law of gravitation. So, all human progress and power are already in everything. This perfection is every man's nature, only it is barred in and prevented from taking its proper course. If anyone can take the bar off and rush his nature, then the man attains the powers which are his already. Those we called wicked become saints as soon as the bar is broken and nature rushes in. It is nature that is driving us towards perfection, and eventually she will bring everyone there. All these practices and struggles to become religious are only negative work to take off the bars and open the doors to that perfection which is our birthright, our nature.
Nirmana chittanyasmita matrat.
From egoism alone proceed the created minds. The theory of karma is that we suffer for our good or bad deeds, and the whole scope of philosophy is to approach the glory of man. All the scriptures sing the glory of man, of the soul, and then, with the same breath, they preach this karma. A good deed brings such a result, and a bad deed such a result, but if the soul can be acted upon by a good or a bad deed, it amounts to nothing. Bad deeds put a bar to the manifestation of our nature, of the Purusa, and good deeds take the obstacles off, and its glory becomes manifest. But the Purusa itself is never changed. Whatever you do never destroys your own glory, your own nature, because the soul cannot be acted upon by anything, only a veil is spread before it, hiding its perfection.
प्रवृत्तिभेदे प्रयोजकं चित्तमेकमनेकेषाम्.
Though the activities of the different created minds are various, the one original mind is the controller of them all. These different minds, which will act in these different bodies, are called made minds, and the bodies made bodies, that is, manufactured bodies and minds. Matter and mind are like two inexhaustible storehouses. When you have become a yogi, you have learned the secret of their control. It was yours all the time, but you had forgotten it. When you become a yogi, you recollect it. Then you can do anything with it, manipulate it any way you like. The material out of which that manufactured mind is created is the very same material which is used as the macrocosm. It is not that mind is one thing and matter another, but they are different existences of the same thing. Asmita, egoism, is the material, the fine state of existence out of which these made minds and made bodies of the yogi will be manufactured. Therefore, when the yogi has found the secret of these energies of naughter, he can manufacture any number of bodies or minds, but they will all be manufactures out of the substance known as egoism.
तत्र ध्यानजमनाशयम्.
Among the various chittas, that which is attained by samadhi is desireless. Among all the various minds that we see in various men, only that mind which has attained to samadhi, perfect concentration, is the highest. A man who has attained certain powers through medicines or through words or through mortifications still has desires, but that man who has attained to samadhi through concentration is alone free from all desires.
कर्मा शुक्ला कृष्णं योगिनस्त्रिविधमितरेषाम्.
Works are neither black nor white for the yogis, for others they are threefold, black, white, and mixed. When the yogi has attained to that state of perfection, the actions of that man and the karma produced by those actions will not bind him because he did not desire them. He just works on, he works to do good, and he does good, but does not care for the result, and it will not come to him. But for ordinary men who have not attained to that highest state, works are of three kind, black evil actions, white good actions, and mixed.
ततस्तद्विपाकानुगुणानामेवाभिव्यक्तिर्वासनानाम्.
From these threefold, works are manifested in each state only those desires which are fitting to that state alone. The others are held in abeyance for the time being. Suppose I have made the three kinds of karma, good, bad, and mixed, and suppose I die and become a god in heaven. The desires in a god body are not the same as the desires in a human body. The god body neither eats nor drinks. What becomes of my past unworked karmas, which produce as their effect the desire to eat and drink? Where would these karmas go when I became a god? The answer is that desires can only manifest themselves in proper environments. Only those desires will come out for which the environment is fitted. The rest will remain stored up. In this life, we have many godly desires, many human desires, many animal desires. If I take a god body, only the god desires will come up because for them, the environments are suitable. And if I take an animal body, only the animal desires will come up and the god desires will wait. What does that show? That by means of environment, we can check these desires. Only that karma which is suited to and fitted for the environments will come out. These proves that the power of environment is the great check to control even karma itself.
जातिदेशकालव्यवहितानामप्यानन्तर्यम् स्मृतिसंस्कारयोरेकरूपत्वात्.
There is connectiveness in desire, even though separated by spices, space and time, there being identification of memory and impressions. Experiences, becoming fine, become impressions. Impressions revivified become memory. The word memory here includes unconscious coordination of past experience, reduced to impressions, with present conscious action. In each body, the group of impressions acquired in a similar body only will become the cause of action in that body. The experiences of dissimilar bodies will be held in abeyance. Each body will act as if it were a descendant of a series of bodies of that species only. Thus, consecutiveness of desires will not be broken.
तासामनादित्वं चाशिषो नित्यत्वात्.
Thirst for happiness, being eternal, desires are without beginning. All experience is preceded by desire for becoming happy. There was no beginning of experience, as each fresh experience is built upon the tendency generated by past experience. Therefore, desire is without beginning.
हेतुफलाश्रयालम्बनैः सङ्गृहीतत्वादेषामभावे तदभावः.
Being held together by cause, effect, support, and objects, in the absence of these is its absence. These desires are held together by cause and effect. If a desire has been raised, it does not die without producing its effect. Then again, the mind stuff is the great storehouse, the support of all past desires, reduced to samskara form. Until they have worked themselves out, they will not die. Moreover, so long as the senses receive the external objects, fresh desires will arise. If it be possible to get rid of these, then alone desires will vanish.
अतीतानागतं स्वरूपतोऽस्त्यध्वभेदाद्धर्माणाम्.
The past and future exist in their own nature, qualities having different ways.
ते व्यक्तसूक्ष्मा गुणात्मानः.
They are manifested or fine, being of the nature of the gunas. The gunas are the three substances, sattva, rajas, and tamas, whose gross state is the sensible universe. Past and future arise from the different modes of manifestation of these gunas.
परिणामैकत्वाद्वस्तुतत्वम्.
The unity in things is from the unity in changes. Though there are three substances, their changes being coordinated, all objects have their unity.
वस्तुसाम्ये चित्तभेदात्तयोर्विभक्तः पन्थाः.
The object being the same, perception and desire vary according to the various minds.
न चैकचित्ततन्त्रं वस्तु तदप्रमाणकं तदा किं स्यात्.
Things are known or unknown to the mind, being dependent on the coloring which they give to the mind.
तदुपरागापेक्षित्वाच्चित्तस्य वस्तु ज्ञाताज्ञातम्.
The states of the mind are always known because the Lord of the mind is unchangeable. The whole gist of this theory is that the universe is both mental and material. And both the mental and material worlds are in a continuous state of flux. What is this book? It is a combination of molecules in constant change. One lot is going out and another coming in. It is a whirlpool, but what makes the unity? What makes it the same book? The changes are rhythmical, in harmonious order they are sending impressions to my mind, and these pieced together make a continuous picture, although their parts are continuously changing.
सदा ज्ञाताश्चित्तवृत्तयस्तत्प्रभोः पुरुषस्य परिणामित्वात्.
Mind is not self-luminous, being an object. Tremendous power is manifested everywhere, in nature, but yet, something tells us that it is not self-luminous, not essentially intelligent. The Purusa alone is self-luminous and gives its light to everything. It is its power that is percolating through all matter and force.
न तत्स्वाभासं दृश्यत्वात्.
From its being unable to cognize two things at the same time. If the mind were self-luminous, it would be able to cognize everything at the same time, which it cannot. If you pay deep attention to one thing, you lose another. If the mind were self-luminous, there would be no limit to the impressions it could receive. The Purusa can cognize all in one moment, therefore, the Purusa is self-luminous, and the mind is not.
एकसमये चोभयानवधारणम्.
Another cognizing mind being assumed, there will be no end to such assumptions and confusion of memory. Let us suppose that there is another mind which cognizes the first, there will have to be something which cognizes that, and so, there will be no end to it. It will result in confusion of memory, there will be no storehouse of memory.
चित्तान्तरदृश्ये बुद्धिबुद्धेरतिप्रसङ्गः स्मृतिसङ्करश्च.
The essence of knowledge, the Purusa being unchangeable, when the mind takes its form, it becomes conscious. Patanjali says this to make it more clear that knowledge is not a quality of the Purusa. When the mind comes near the Purusa, it is reflected, as it were, upon the mind, and the mind, for the time being, becomes knowing and seems as if it were itself the Purusa.
चितेरप्रतिसङ्क्रमायास्तदाकारापत्तौ swabuddhisamvedanam.
Colored by the seer and the seen, the mind is able to understand everything. On the one side, the external world, the seen, is being reflected, and on the other, the seer is being reflected. Thus comes the power of all knowledge to the mind.
Drashtradrushyoparaktam chittam sarvartham.
The mind, through its innumerable desires, acts for another, the purusa being combinations. The mind is a compound of various things, and therefore, it cannot work for itself. Everything that is a combination in this world has some object for that combination, some third thing for which this combination is going on. So, this combination of the mind is for the purusa.
Tadasankheya vasanabhischitramapi parartham sanhatyakaritvat.
For the discriminating, the perception of the mind as Atman ceases. Through discrimination, the yogi knows that the purusa is not mind.
Visheshadarshina atma bhava bhavana vinivrittihi.
Then bent on discriminating, the mind attains the previous state of Kavalya isolation. Thus the practice of yoga leads to discriminating power, to clearness of vision. The veil drops from the eyes, and we see things as they are. We find that this nature is a compound and is showing the panorama for the purusa, who is the witness, that this nature is not the Lord, that the whole of these combinations of nature are simply for the sake of showing these phenomena to the purusa, the enthroned king within. When discrimination comes by long practice, fear ceases, and the mind attains isolation.
Tada vivekanimnam kaivalya pragbharam chittam tachhidreshu pratyayanantarani sanskarebhyah.
The thoughts that arise as obstructions to that are from impressions. All the various ideas that arise, making us believe that we require something external to make us happy, are obstructions to that perfection. The purusa is happiness and blessedness by its own nature. But that knowledge is covered over by past impressions. These impressions have to work themselves out.
Hanamesham kleshavaduktam.
Their destruction is in the same manner as of ignorance, etc., as said before.
Prasankhyanepyakusidasya sarvatha vivekakyater dharmamegha samadhihi.
Even when arriving at the right discriminating knowledge of the senses, he who gives up the fruits unto him comes as the result of perfect discrimination, the samadhi called the cloud of virtue. When the yogi has attained to this discrimination, all these powers will come that were mentioned in the last chapter, but the true yogi rejects them all. Unto him comes a peculiar knowledge, a particular light called the Dharma Megha, the cloud of virtue. All the great prophets of the world whom history has recorded had this. They had found the whole foundation of knowledge within themselves. Truth to them had become real. Peace and calmness and perfect purity became their own nature after they had given up all these vanities of powers.
Tatah klesha karma nivrittihi.
From that comes cessation of pains and works. When that cloud of virtue has come, then no more is there fear of falling, nothing can drag the yogi down. No more will there be evils for him. No more pains.
Tada sarvavaranamalaapetasya jnanasyanantyagneyamalpam.
Then knowledge, bereft of covering and impurities, becoming infinite, the noble becomes small. Knowledge itself is there, its covering is gone. One of the Buddhistic scriptures sums up what is meant by the Buddha, which is the name of a state. It defines it as infinite knowledge, infinite as the sky. Jesus attained to that state and became the Christ. All of you will attain to that state, and knowledge becoming infinite, the noble becomes small. This whole universe, with all its knowable, becomes as nothing before the purusa. The ordinary man thinks himself very small because to him the noble seems to be so infinite.
Tatah kritarthanam parinamakhramasamaptirgunanam.
Then are finished the successive transformations of the qualities, they having attained the end. Then all these various transformations of the qualities, which change from species to species, cease forever.
Kshana pratiyogi parinama parantanirgrahya kramaha
The changes that exist in relation to moments and which are perceived at the other end at the end of a series are succession. Patanjali here defines the word succession, the changes that exist in relation to moments. While I am thinking, many moments pass, and with each moment there is a change of idea, but we only perceive these changes at the end of a series. So, perception of time is always in the memory. This is called succession, but for the mind that has realized omnipresence, all these have finished. Everything has become present for it. The present alone exists, the past and future are lost. This stands controlled, and all knowledge is there in 1 second. Everything is known like a flash.
पुरुषार्थशून्यानां गुणानां प्रतिप्रसवः कैवल्यं स्वरूपप्रतिष्ठा वा चितिशक्तिरिति.
The resolution in the inverse order of the qualities, perfect of any motive of action for the Purusa, is Kaivalya, or it is the establishment of the power of knowledge in its own nature. Nature's task is done, this unselfish task which our sweet nurse nature had imposed upon herself. As it were, she gently took the self-forgetting soul by the hand and showed him all the experiences in the universe, all manifestations, bringing him higher and higher through various bodies, till his glory came back and he remembered his own nature. Then the kind mother went back the way she came, for others who have also lost their way in the trackless desert of life. And thus, she is working, without beginning and without end. And thus through pleasure and pain, through good and evil, the infinite river of souls is flowing into the ocean of perfection, of self-realization. Glory unto those who have realized their own nature. May their blessings be on us all.
इति patanjali virachite योगसूत्रे चतुर्थः कैवल्यपादः इति श्रीपातञ्जलयोगसूत्राणि